The following video is related to a much larger work that I have had on the back burner for a long time, where I want to present this combination history lesson and series of game reviews as I explore the birth, life, death, and rebirth of the point-and-click game. The reason I want to cover this concept is because everything from the birth to the death of the style can be tied back to a single company, that being Sierra Entertainment, and it's a very fascinating story that I really want to tell, but it's such a monumental task that it's not coming out for a long while. This is a related and condensed sub-story that you really just have to hear to believe, because you'd never guess that the creation of the point-and-click game is also inseparably tied to the origins of NSFW video games. Before we actually start, I do have to define the naughty word of the day that YouTube doesn't like, since famously the Supreme Court definition was, "I know it when I see it." Pornography, defined by Merriam-Webster, is the depiction of erotic behavior, as in pictures or writing, intended to cause sexual excitement, which is a very fair and acceptable definition. This only gets tricky when the legal definition is the one you consider. The legal definition, paraphrased from Cornell University's definition, generally is media that depicts nudity or sexual acts for the purpose of sexual stimulation, although not all media that contains nudity or sexual acts is porn, if it is intended for a purpose other than sexual stimulation. The reason I'm saying all of this is because it is important to note that NSFW, or video games intended for adults, are not inherently porn. Some of the games I am going to talk about today are simply games that contain sexual content, while others are very much porn by definition. There's a lot of variety in what I'm going to cover here, since this is such a varied term that all comes from the same mother mostly. The mother of the point-and-click game style, Sierra Entertainment. From its humble origins in text-based adventure games to appearing in every other style of game imaginable, join me as I discuss a myriad of games, some in more detail than others, in mostly chronological order, as we explore how one common ancestor still manages to exist in gaming today. Also, please note that I am only talking about real games that had a retail presence and not things like online flash games or fan projects, which means if you answered the question, "What game would you hate for your wife to walk in on you playing?" with
Meat and fuck kingdom, Steve,
you'd be wrong, as that is not within the scope of this.
Meat and hot?
Our starting point is 1981, and unsurprisingly, the first video game to feature pornographic content is the aptly named Soft Porn Adventure. This is a text-based adventure game that I cannot be bothered to find or play for myself, but from what I can gather, this is a game where the player is tasked with solving various puzzles to find items to win the affections of various women during a house party, to varying degrees of success. This game was not well received by critics of the time, or even by critics now, but it sold pretty damn good for an early PC game, and it was of course published by Sierra Entertainment, which is an incredibly important fact for the next section, where we really get into where adult content took off. The only other game of any kind of note from this era is 1983's controversial travesty that is Custer's Revenge, and I'm not going to talk about it any more than that because I don't care, and it's only notable for being shock value for the sake of being shock value. 1987 is an important year in this story, and in fact, I would argue it is the most important year in this story. Sierra Entertainment has been doing really well, especially since the release of their 1984 game, King's Quest, literally changing history by inventing the point-and-click style. That's not a joke. King's Quest is the first point-and-click game ever, and by 1987, Sierra had already started their other two big franchises, Space Quest and Police Space Quest. But let's step back a year to 1986, when a man approaches the CEO of Sierra and asks if he can remake soft porn adventure after Sierra lost a Disney license. And then in 1987, the world was gifted a game that was completely different from the thing it was remaking, Leisure Suit Larry in the Land of the Lounge Lizards. And holy shit, did this game change everything. It was bold, it was sleazy, it was silly, it was so sexually charged, and my god, it was funny. Leisure Suit Larry is a game all about Larry Laffer, an extremely unlucky middle-aged virgin who is going around the city of lost wages trying to get laid. His misadventures often end in disastrous failure until he fails upwards and ends the game by finally getting laid, and thus winning, only after he has solved the puzzles the other women present to him. As a game, this is a point-and-click puzzle game, full of content that appealed to adults. I mean, the whole game is a sex comedy in the vein of something like 40-Year-Old Virgin, and in 1987, this was a controversial thing for a game to be, which resulted in low initial sales as many places refused to carry it, but word of mouth eventually caught on and the game sold 300,000 copies and spawned an empire as Sierra's fourth major franchise. I would say more about this game's story, but the inherent problem is I can't without just giving away puzzle solutions, so just know that I think this game is incredibly funny, and to be honest, incredibly tame. There is implied nudity and sex, but it's never explicit in the way you'd expect something like this to be, yet it is still incredibly important because this game truly proved that games aimed at adult audiences could work. Larry had 5 sequels made by Sierra, and one final one that I call the nail in Sierra's coffin since it was made by a different studio. The games are as follows. After Leisure Suit Larry and the Land of the Lounge Lizards, we have Leisure Suit Larry Goes Searching for Love in Several Wrong Places, 1988, Leisure Suit Larry 3, Passionate Patty in Pursuit of Pulsating Pectorals, 1989, Leisure Suit Larry 5, Passionate Patty Does a Little Undercover Work, 1991, Leisure Suit Larry 6, Shape Up or Slip Out, 1993, Leisure Suit Larry Love for Sale, 1996, and Leisure Suit Larry Magna Cum Laude, 2004. Now, you may be wondering where LSL-4 is, and that game is not real, much like the 7th sequel, Leisure Suit Larry Box Office Bust, which is technically a released game, but I refuse to acknowledge it because I won't let it hurt me, and it can't hurt me if it isn't real. Anyway, I haven't played every Larry game yet, and for all of the games made by Sierra and Al Lowe, 1 through 3, 5 through 7, the gameplay remains the same, the core concepts remain the same, the humor evolves and truly does some crazy things, and then there's Magna Cum Laude. I have not only played this game, I've beaten it and had almost completed it. But make no mistake that this game is dog shit and not a Leisure Suit Larry game. This is a 3D game that feels like those cash grab movie tie-in games where it's full of the same repetitive mini-games and same old ugly graphics that lack any charm or stylistic integrity. And while there is a lot more nudity and sexual content than its predecessors, that's not a good thing. Yes, culturally it makes sense that these games reflect the more sexual and edgy attitudes of the 2000s, but it doesn't make it good. The proper Larry games all feel like the video game equivalent of a 70s exploitation film like Beyond the Valley of the Dolls or 1965's Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, where they have an intentional sense of humor that feels intentionally campy and goofy. While the end of Larry with Magna Cum Laude is a cynical and thoughtless, trashy straight-to-VHS movie. Not only that, but it also shows a real death of the point-and-click game, as everything must shift to 3D open-world games across the board. To get more on track to this video's point, 1987 is the year that proved that games aimed towards adults have a place in the market. While most don't recognize Larry anymore, he opened a lot of doors for games to contain content that was more provocative. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Larry paved the way for a game like GTA to exist, or more so, it paved the path for the lesser important games that released in this era that I haven't played yet, like Sex Vixens from Space in 1988, Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, 1993, Grand Theft Auto 3, 2001, BMX XXX, 2002, GTA Vice City, 2002, The Guy Game, 2004, and most famously and controversially, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas from 2004. Yeah, you can't talk about mature content in video games without mentioning the infamous hot coffee mod scandal of GTA San Andreas. If you've used YouTube for any substantial amount of time, you know this story, but long story short, there was a mod that added a previously cut sex minigame to San Andreas, and this caused a massive controversy that reached all the way to the US congressional level. It's an iconic story that further helped cement the legacy of GTA. Speaking of the legacy of GTA... Another aspect of adult content, one that is far less interesting to talk about, is violence. I mean, violence in movies and sex on TV, right? Yeah, so let's look at a history of violence in video games. Well, you have your obvious go-tos, GTA, Resident Evil, Doom, and Manhunt, where violence is an integral aspect of the game, and there's more obscure games that are known for being banned, like Carmageddon, and the poster child of getting banned, Postal 2. Again, you being someone who has gotten this far into the video know these games and their penchant for violent acts, as tied to gameplay and progression, is nothing new or exciting. But it is important to note that violence is a part of what gets classified as adult content, even if I was mostly here to talk about sex in games and not violence in games. I at least had to mention it, and this becomes an ever-growing part of games, and it appears more as time goes on, which means we're on to the next major era as we carry on properly. So this era is weird, as upon research, a lot of this is just not worth talking about in terms of adult content, but there were some little examples that were controversial or banned in some way that makes them interesting. Prime example, The Punisher 2005, a game known for its excessive violence and torture sequences, so much so that it was banned in the UK. Similarly, Manhunt, Manhunt 2, and Postal 2 are all known for their extreme violence and all released in this period, but those are boring and you all know those games. Now, a weird oddball to mention is South Park: The Stick of Truth 2014, as this game is very distinctly for adults, in a way that really pushed the envelope for what could be done in a video game. I mean, it features the protagonist getting anally probed by aliens, watching your parents have sex, performing an abortion, fighting Nazi zombie fetuses, and fighting a child predator, and all of that really fun South Park goodness that proves that it's made for an adult audience. I, of course, played this game as a middle schooler, and god do I love it so much. In fact, there's a video I did where I talk about this game a little bit more on this very channel, so go check that out if you'd like, it's a good one. More to the point, I know violence isn't the main scope of this video, but this era really represents something that I don't care enough to research or talk about. A lot of these games are just pornographic things made in Flash that only exist to be jerked off to and have no depth. Every game mentioned before this had a degree of plot or purpose. I mean, the Leisure Suit Larry games are here for the purpose of being genuinely funny and entertaining games that have a narrative. BMX XXX Xbox is theoretically a Tony Hawk Pro Skaters type game, and GTA San Andreas is, well, San Andreas. These are games made for adults that have a purpose as a video game, but a lot of stuff from this era is stuff like Sexy Poker 2006, Sexy Pool, Sexy Vegas, Video Strip Poker Supreme, Playboy Blackjack, Playboy Poker, Playboy Slot Machine, Live Strip Poker, Sexy Poker, and who could forget Pirates Poker XXX, which is a long-winded way of saying things that no one cares about or remembers. Or, if it is something they remember, it's because it's
Meat and fuck kingdom, Steve.
And as such, it shouldn't be counted for the sake of what I want to talk about. Yes, there's a fascinating history around things like Flash or Source filmmaker animations, but go listen to someone else talk about all of that. I want to talk about the next era in our story, the part where things get real weird like it used to be before it got lazy in this era. This is the era I really wanted to talk about because this is when things get more varied and definitely more explicit compared to what came before. 2015 is a major year for this, considering the release of a game that would get copied into oblivion by a lot of people who didn't understand what made the game special in the first place. It's HuniePop. HuniePop, for the uninitiated, is a match 3 tile puzzle game where the player has to get laid by a lot of different women in order to save the world or something. Of course, the game starts with the player being a total loser and a dork who gets chosen to be the savior of humanity by some interdimensional sex fairy or something. It doesn't matter. The game is a dating sim meets match 3 puzzle game that was huge on YouTube back in 2015, and as such it got copied into oblivion. If you venture through the Steam store with adults-only content enabled, you are A, a braver man than I, and B, going to find just a metric shit ton of games that fit the HuniePop model and are all like $3 at most. Back to HuniePop though, in 2021 it got a sequel called HuniePop 2 Double Date, which had just as stupid of a narrative, but with some unique twists on the gameplay, like complications that make winning over the girls more of a challenge, even though it is fundamentally just the same game as before, just with threesomes as the main goal. The fascinating thing about HuniePop is that it was a huge phenomenon on YouTube when it came out, as mentioned before, and it really does represent how weird YouTube culture used to be. And further to the point, we get to a game that I'm not sure I can accurately describe the history and story of for this. I mean, this game did irreversible damage to my vocabulary, and the amount of phrases from this game, and one character specifically, that I quote all the time really says a lot about how the internet ruins and shapes your sense of humor. This next game, my dear viewer, is House Party. And weirdly, this is where our story comes full circle. House Party, despite releasing version 1.0 in 2022, has its origins on YouTube back in 2017 when it exploded in popularity while in early access. Then it had a couple of comebacks to the point where after release it had celebrity collaborations from 2 different YouTubers, a famous cosplayer, and an actual musician? But that is getting ahead of myself a bit. So, from the top! House Party is a 3D point-and-click puzzle game where you get invited to a house party full of all sorts of wacky characters that are all a puzzle to be solved so you can have sex or die trying, among doing all sorts of other things like a real janky combat system causing conflict between various characters, helping people realize things about themselves, peeing, dancing, whipping your dick out at any moment and stroking it crazy style, but above all else, watching Frank beat the shit out of Patrick about 500 times. With that, who are our various characters in this journey? Outside of the player, we've got Amy, Ashley, Brittany, Derek, Frank, Catherine, Leah, Madison, Patrick, Rachel, and Stephanie at the party by default, and a couple of surprise guests that may take a bit more effort to invite to the party. Now, I don't own the 2 celebrity campaign DLCs or the supporters pack, which means I don't know anything about the Liz Katz or Doja Cat storylines or anything that the supporters pack adds, but I do have everything else, and I can talk about that very loosely since I don't want to spoil everything. The first thing you, the player, want to do upon booting up the game is customize every character using the perfectly fine character customizer so that everything fits your vibe. My personal favorites include making Dr. Manpatrick from Watchmen, or doing what's intended with the character's custom decals and sneaking a bunch of glazed ham promos into a bunch of different outfits. Anyhows, after thoroughly customizing everything to your heart's content with the limited options you're provided, you're then free to begin a long night of debauchery and chaos that you get to cause. As mentioned before, the way you get to achieve Funky Town shenanigans is by pointing and clicking your way through the house using the items and character interactions to achieve your goals. This is a game where the player is tasked with solving various puzzles to find items to win the affections of various women during a house party. And here is where we see a true return to origins for adult content in video games, since this is spiritually what soft porn adventure tried to achieve all the way back in 1981. Because yes, my dear viewer, this game is a comedy. I mean, dear God, just off the top of my head, we've got such classic lines as, "Whoa, dude, I can see your thing, and it's bigger than my thing. I need a moment to think about this." From Patrick, the wonderful, "Patrick called you an ass-licking fart monkey. I'm gonna fuck his shit up" interaction with Frank, Derek's whole rant about being too angry to hold his brother accountable for his own actions, but most iconically, Frank's, "How's it going, bud? Staying away from the alcohol?" This one line single-handedly ruined my vocabulary and speech for years. I used to say it all the time, much to the chagrin of people who had to deal with my incessant vocal stimming being something as stupid as, "How's it going, bud? Staying away from the alcohol?" I mean, that line was so important that I genuinely can't say it without dropping into the Frank voice. And I think it highlights what makes this game so special to me. This is one of those instances of the little indie game that could have very easily been a game that no one cared about, that appeared on Steam in early access, and then became something because of YouTube. And the fact that this thing had waves of interest is crazy. The first wave from early access was with huge YouTubers like PewDiePie and Jacksepticeye playing it. Then into the second wave with the Game Grumps playthrough when the full game released. And it's amazing how this porn game had such an influence on a platform that is as puritanical as YouTube is. I mean, these videos got millions of views, if not at least hundreds of thousands. And it is truly astonishing that it was allowed to escape as unscathed as it was. And even as those are several years old now, there was a third wave of popularity for the game in the form of Something Stupid earlier in 2025, which leads perfectly into our final section of this video that's a glorified tangent. Where are we now? In late July, early August of the year of our Lord 2025, there was a controversy you may have seen going around about payment processing companies threatening to pull their services from platforms like Steam that carry games they find unsavory, which resulted in the mass removal of hundreds of thousands of porn games for weirdos that I largely avoided mentioning because I'm not brave enough to find out more about games like No Mercy. Use your own discretion if you want to look for the specifics about what that game was doing. That was truly reprehensible and objectionable. Anyways, the point is, this was a level of censorship the games industry hadn't faced in a long time, and one that caused a lot of uproar in the gaming community at large, since the next step was trying to pull games that were normal or talked about issues that some people didn't like, which is a long-winded way of saying the Christian fundamentalists were trying to censor what can and can't be talked about, just like the satanic panic of the 80s. Now, while I have the gift of hindsight, and I can say that so far nothing has actually come of these attempts to censor gaming, there was a brief window where it was a real possibility, and so out of protest comes the hero of our story, Good Old Games, or GOG. GOG, for those unaware, is the only real alternative to Steam when it comes to PC gaming marketplaces. And in August, they had a code that would give you a ton of games that all faced a potential delisting for free! That's right, they were giving these games away for free, but they didn't tell you what was in the bundle, so I, upon learning about it, redeemed the code and was met with a list of games that I didn't particularly want, and a couple of games that I did want. A lot of it was erotic visual novels that mean nothing to me, but of the noteworthy games, there was Postal 2, Agony, Hunipop, and more importantly to me, House Party. And the funny side note about this was that for several weeks after the code had done its thing, the top selling thing on GOG was the explicit content DLC for House Party. It's exactly for what you think it is. Anyway, beyond the valley of the House Party lies an uncertain future, yet one where in the length of time this video has gone on for, 100 games with adult content have released, and there's something special about that. A long and storied tradition that goes back to the history of a specific style of game, and all of which can be tied back to the rise and fall of Sierra Entertainment. Anyhow, thank you for listening to this very lengthy and weirdly poetic tangent that was truly a lot of fun for me to cover, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks again, and good night!
Meet and fuck Kingdom, Steve.